Hello, I'm Odessa. I was left the old house, peeling paint, creaking floors, ghosts in the attic. My sister, she got the company, the money, the stage lights. She called my inheritance cute, said I got the leftovers. But what if the house held more than dust and memories? What if the truth she buried, about Dad, about his will, wasn't buried at all? And what happens when the FBI starts digging in her backyard instead of mine? Do you think legacy is measured in stock shares or in who survives the fire? The ceiling fans in the old law office creaked as they turned, moving the heavy southern air just enough to stir the scent of oak paneling and worn leather. Sunlight filtered through blinds coated with a faint layer of dust, casting stripes across the polished conference table where my family had gathered. I had arrived early, wearing a plain navy dress and the same small silver earrings my father gave me on my 18th birthday. They were the only jewelry I could stomach for the day. Celine arrived 20 minutes late, the click of her heels sharp against the wood floor. She wore a cream-colored suit that screamed executive power, the sort of outfit that photographs well in annual reports. She breezed past me without a glance, her perfume arriving before she did. One of my cousins whispered, "Looks like she's running the show already." And a low murmur of agreement spread along the line of relatives. It was understood, like some unwritten law, that Celine would get the company and I would be left with the house, a relic of our father's past. The attorney cleared his throat, his tie slightly askew as if he too sensed the tension. He unfolded the papers with deliberate slowness, reading father's last directives in a tone meant to sound neutral, but every sentence felt like a hammer. To my eldest daughter Celine, his eyes flicked up briefly, I leave the controlling interest of Dellinger Industries. Applause rippled softly around the table, like a congregation after a sermon. To my youngest daughter Odessa, he continued, I leave the family residence at 14 Whitmore Drive. My throat tightened. It wasn't the house, though the place was crumbling. It was the message. A lifetime of work with him at the company meant nothing. Celine turned to me with a slow, triumphant smile that might have looked sweet to an outsider. A cousin snorted, trying to stifle a laugh. I kept my gaze fixed on the grain of the table, blinking hard. When the reading ended, Celine stood to give an impromptu speech. Her voice carried that silky, professional warmth she used in interviews. Dad knew who could carry the legacy, she said, adjusting her cufflink for effect. I'll honor his vision and keep our family's name strong. The family clapped again, some standing, their eyes bright at the prospect of continued wealth. My name was not mentioned once. As we filed out, Celine passed close enough for her hair to brush my shoulder. Maybe you'll finally get to repaint those peeling walls, she whispered, her breath warm and sweet with champagne. I forced a smile, my jaw aching from the effort. Inside, something sharp splintered, not anger yet, but a kind of hollow awareness. The drive back to 14 Whitmore was quiet. The late afternoon sun hung low, turning the Spanish moss along the road into strands of copper. When I pulled up, the house looked smaller than I remembered, its shutters sagging like tired eyelids. The key felt cold in my palm as I fitted it into the lock. Inside, the air was heavy with dust and the faint ghost of my father's cigars. Floorboards creaked underfoot as I walked through rooms layered with memories. In the dining room, sunlight illuminated a worn spot on the table where we used to play chess. I paused, my fingers brushing the groove his watch had left in the wood over years of after-dinner games. Some memories warmed me, others stung like salt in an old cut. Upstairs, I found a frame face down on the hallway carpet. The glass had cracked into spiderweb lines. It was one of the few photographs of just the two of us, me on his shoulders at a company picnic, both of us laughing. I propped it against the wall but couldn't bring myself to straighten it fully. I wandered into his study. Dust motes floated in the slanting light, settling over rows of books with their spines cracked from use. I began to tidy, pulling stacks of papers into piles, needing order in the chaos. Near the old fireplace, my heel caught on a loose floorboard. When I knelt to press it back, it shifted under my hand. Beneath it, I saw the edge of a small rusted wall safe recessed into the brick. My pulse picked up. The dial was stiff from disuse. I tried our mother's birthday. No response. I tried Celine's, though it felt absurd. Still nothing. Finally, almost without thinking, I spun the dial to my own birth date. A muted click echoed like a whisper. The door creaked open, revealing a neat stack of documents tied with string, a leather-bound journal, and old company contracts yellowed with age. On top sat an envelope, sealed and slightly brittle at the edges. In my father's handwriting, the words read, "For Odessa, if anything ever feels wrong." I didn't open it. My hand hovered, then fell to my side. Outside, rain began to drum lightly on the tin roof, the sound steady and intimate. I stared at the envelope, my heart thudding against my ribs. Why would he hide this, and what was he so afraid of? Rain still pattered softly on the tin roof when I finally exhaled and closed the door behind me. The old house creaked, either from the storm or from the memory it carried in its walls. The envelope from Father lay on the desk like a quiet bomb, elegant in its restraint, damning in its implication. I stood in that hushed room for long minutes, listening to the wind snake its way through the gutters, before I dared breach the seal. It was labeled in his familiar, precise handwriting. If anything ever feels wrong. Morning light had started to seep through the heavy drapes, filtering in golden and gray. I opened the envelope with the same reverence one might open a will. Inside, nestled carefully, was a small USB drive and a single folded sheet of paper, thick, textured paper, the kind Father used only for things that mattered. His handwriting was uneven, more fragile than I remembered. But the tone was unmistakably his, measured, honest, and layered with the sadness of someone who saw what was coming and felt powerless to stop it. Odie, if you're reading this, then I suppose things have gone exactly the way I feared. There are things I should have told you sooner, but fear, pride, and time kept getting in the way. Celine, she's always had drive, too much maybe, but I didn't see how far she'd go. The papers I was told to sign, I never fully agreed with them. I tried to delay, tried to adjust, but I was tired, Odie. They wore me down. Don't let them erase you. This house protects more than memories. Love. Dad. I stared at the letter for a long time, my fingers trembling. Somewhere in those words, I heard his voice, the gravel in it when he was tired, the way he lingered when he said my name. How many nights had he sat at this very desk, staring at documents he didn't believe in, wondering how to protect us both? I wiped my eyes and reached for my laptop. With a deep breath, I inserted the USB drive and opened the single folder it contained. Dozens of files, most of them emails, loaded before my eyes. Each message felt like a punch. Emails between Celine and our longtime family lawyer, Julian Hart, with subject lines that twisted my stomach. Removing Odessa, transition strategy. Stakeholder revisions, Dad unaware. Use revised version only. Dad too unstable to track changes. One thread contained a list of final stakeholders. My name had been on earlier drafts, but in the final version, it had been scrubbed, like I never existed. In another attachment, someone had annotated, "Rename stakeholder list, remove minority names." The date was just 2 weeks before Dad's final hospitalization. They knew he was dying. They had moved while he was vulnerable, cornered him when he was weakest. My heart was pounding as my mind reeled. I found myself drifting back to a memory. Christmas Eve, just last year. Celine had spent most of the night on the phone, pacing the great room, whispering into her device while pretending to sip wine. Father had been quiet, his eyes far away, watching the fire. He tried to talk to me that night. I remember now, the way he lingered at the edge of the conversation. But I was buried in my own heartbreak, mourning things I couldn't fix. I missed the signs. That evening, I called Ronan, a former board member and one of my father's oldest confidants. He lived in a modest townhouse, much humbler than I remembered. When he opened the door, the look in his eyes told me he already knew why I was there. I didn't accuse. Not at first. "Did you know about the emails?" I asked softly, standing in his warm living room as thunder rolled outside. He looked away, sighed. "Odie, I did what I had to do." My jaw clenched. "What does that mean?" "I have grandchildren. I need security." "I'm not proud of it. You were part of this family." His silence said more than his words ever could. "Did you ever believe in me?" I asked, quieter now, almost to myself. He stared at me for a long time. Then, slowly, almost with regret, he shook his head, and that was it. I walked out as dusk deepened into night. The rain blurred the street lamps, and the world seemed to dissolve into watercolor. Back home, I wandered into the backyard, the camellia bushes wild and untamed. I stepped into the mud barefoot, let the wind hit me as hard as it could. I screamed, a raw, broken cry, part grief, part fury, part pure confusion. The wind carried it away, and then I cried. Not just for me, but for my father. For all the things he couldn't say until it was too late. I cried because I was tired of being polite, tired of being dismissed. No more silence. I returned inside and sat at Father's desk, wiping the mud from my legs with a worn towel. The glow of the laptop greeted me again. I found a folder on the USB marked Version Unedited. My hand hovered over the mouse. Click. The folder opened. Dozens of files popped up. Contracts, scanned handwritten notes, ledgers, board minutes. I began comparing the original files to the ones that had been finalized after Father's health declined. It was worse than I thought. Whole paragraphs had been removed, stakeholder agreements rewritten, board votes falsified. Some ledger entries, millions in transfers, were signed off with forged initials. I stared at a document labeled Pre-Final Terms, Odessa Trust Holdings. In it, my name was there, clear as day, listed as a co-trustee and future majority shareholder of a subdivision within Whitmore Holdings. That version never made it past draft. They had buried me with revision history. I sat back in the chair, hand over my mouth, trying to steady myself, but underneath the grief and betrayal, something else took root: resolve. My father hadn't given me this USB to mourn. He had left me a map. I would follow this paper trail, every revision, every deleted clause, every email where my name was erased. I would make sure the truth saw daylight. They wanted to rewrite me out of the story. But I was still here. The rain had stopped by morning, leaving behind a thin, silvery mist that drifted through the alleys and curled along the eaves of Savannah's old rooftops. The city, usually soaked in sunlight and southern charm, looked gray and breathless under the cloud-covered sky. I drove in silence, fingers tight on the steering wheel as the glass and steel monolith came into view. The headquarters my father built from the ground up, the one that now bore a different name in spirit, even if not in signage. That building had once felt like a second home to me. As a child, I used to run through its halls, marveling at how everyone smiled when my father passed by. He wasn't just the boss, he was beloved, admired. Today, the same building felt unfamiliar, sterile, like a monument built over a forgotten grave. I parked across the street, letting the engine idle a moment longer than necessary. My breath fogged the windshield. I stared at the sleek architecture, trying to convince myself I belonged there, or once did. Eventually, I stepped out, pulling my coat tight against the morning chill and crossing the street with steps more hesitant than proud. The lobby greeted me with cold precision. High ceilings, pristine white floors, and chrome fixtures that gleamed under recessed lights. I approached the front desk, heart pounding. The receptionist barely looked up, but when I showed her my visitor badge, her eyes flickered over the name. She hesitated. "I'm here for a tour," I said, voice calm, almost casual. "I used to work here." She blinked once. "Oh, please wait in the lounge." Her fingers danced awkwardly over the keyboard before she gestured toward the waiting area. I nodded and walked away. The lounge was elegant but unwelcoming. Expensive furniture arranged like an art piece, minimalist and emotionally void. A silent flat screen scrolled through corporate achievements. I sat down, noticing how the air felt too clean, too filtered, like it had been scrubbed of anything human. Employees passed by in pressed suits and polished shoes. A few looked at me, curious, cautious. I saw no recognition in their eyes. My last name meant nothing here now, not anymore. Eventually, a young assistant appeared and offered to guide me through. She was polite, professional, and entirely indifferent. As we walked, She gestured to various departments, quoting phrases I'd read 100 times in press releases. Our innovation wing, collaboration pods, strategic alignment zones. Then we reached the gallery hallway, the corridor of portraits. This used to be my favorite part of the building as a child. The walls once displayed the evolution of the company, its key founders, early investors, and, at the center, a dignified portrait of my father, Charles Argonne, founder CEO. Now, his portrait was gone. In its place was a modern rebranding display, sleek lines, futuristic fonts, and in the middle, a massive photograph of my sister, Celine, titled Celine Argonne, Visionary Leadership. I stopped walking. My throat tightened. "Excuse me," I said to the assistant. "Where's the founder's portrait? My father's?" She blinked. "Oh, I believe that was removed during the rebranding initiative last year." A young man passed by, overhearing. He leaned in slightly. "They phased out the old branding," he said softly, almost apologetic. Founder portraits didn't align with the forward-focused identity Celine pushed through. He gave me a brief, regretful glance, then disappeared down the hallway. I stared at the empty space on the wall where his portrait should have been. My hands clenched at my sides. It wasn't just a redesign, it was erasure. A deletion of the man who built every floor we stood on. The assistant motioned for us to continue, but I felt like I was floating, disconnected. When we arrived at the boardroom, it only confirmed what I feared. The wall that once bore the inscription Founder's Legacy had been stripped clean. Now it read in bold, modern letters, Celine Argonne, Shaping the Future. No mention of Charles Argonne, not even a plaque. My heart ached, not for myself, but for him. Everything he created, the culture he nurtured, the legacy he tried to pass on, it had all been overwritten. I remembered a conversation we once had in this very room, 7 years ago. He had asked gently, "Do you ever think of taking over someday?" I laughed. "Dad, I'm not the business type. I want something quiet, simple." He smiled. "That's exactly why you should. This place needs someone with heart, not just hunger." Back then, I didn't understand what he meant. Now, standing in the cold echo of his absence, I did. I excused myself quietly and found my way to the nearest restroom. Once inside the stall, I locked the door and leaned against the wall, letting the tears fall. Silent, angry tears. Not because I wanted the company, but because this place had buried my father without even a whisper. "It's like he never existed," I whispered to the empty air. A quiet sound at the door startled me. I opened it slightly and saw a janitor standing there. He didn't say a word, just offered a box of tissues through the crack and nodded. A small act, but it grounded me. I wiped my face, steadied my breathing, and slipped down a corridor I once knew well. At the far end, past what used to be a storage closet, I tapped a hidden panel and inserted the USB stick Dad once told me to keep safe. A quiet beep. The false wall opened. Behind it was the server room, dusty, cold, untouched. Rows of drives blinked faintly in the dark. I approached the archive terminal, hands trembling, and began to search. Then I found it. A log marked, "Office cleared," 2 days before death. Every item from his office, files, documents, even family photos, moved to storage, but there was no final location. The trail just stopped. I dug deeper and found a folder titled Legacy File, but it had been marked deleted. Deleted by Ronan, the COO, my father's closest advisor, someone I once called Uncle Ronan. I copied every fragment I could find. Deleted board meeting minutes, strategy memos, personal notes, pieces of a man they tried to erase. As the data transferred, a voice rose inside me, fierce and cold. "You didn't just erase him. You tried to erase me, too." I tucked the USB into my coat pocket and walked calmly toward the exit. My boots echoed softly in the marble hallway. Each step felt heavier than the last, but I kept moving. Just as I reached the lobby doors, a voice cut through the silence. "Nostalgia tour, little sister?" I froze. Turned. Celine stood there, arms folded, smile razor sharp. No warmth, no regret, Only war. Celine's voice still echoed in my ears when I finally left the building. I didn't give her the satisfaction of an answer, but my pulse stayed hard and hot long after I reached the car. By the time I pulled into the cracked driveway of the old house, the sun was already low over the live oaks. I set the USB down on the kitchen counter and stood there for a long time, hands pressed against the wood like I needed to steady the ground under me. 2 mornings later, I was trying to distract myself with something as ordinary as breakfast. Bacon hissed in the skillet, and I watched coffee drip slowly into the pot. The television played low in the background. Business news, a local anchor I barely recognized. I wasn't listening until I heard her name. "Exclusive," the anchor said brightly. "Celine Argonne on carrying her father's legacy." I turned. On the screen, Celine sat under warm studio lights, wearing one of her pale suits that made her look like a senator's wife. She laughed softly at something the host said. Then came the words that landed like a blow. "I think Dad always wanted me to take the lead," she told the camera. "Odessa's strength lies elsewhere. We support her in spirit, of course. She never really understood the business side." The host nodded with mock sympathy. "Family dynamics can be complicated." Celine tilted her head, the same way she did at Dad's funeral. "My artistic sister has her own path. I wish her all the best." I stood frozen, spatula in hand, bacon starting to burn. It wasn't just the dismissal. It was the casualness, the public certainty. Like I was a ghost no one had to consult. The smell of scorched food filled the kitchen. By the afternoon, my inbox was full of screenshots, people forwarding posts from Celine's PR team, old co-workers tagging me in comments like I was some sideshow. A cousin wrote, "Hope that old house doesn't leak." Oh wait, it does. Someone tweeted a photo of the house with a joke about haunted mansions. The laughter bled through the screen. I didn't reply. I deleted my Facebook account instead, the same one where Dad used to send me short notes with half smiles in them. When my elbow knocked against a shelf, my mother's old vase slipped and shattered on the floor. The crash startled me, but also felt inevitable, like the sound of a cord snapping. That night, I sat in the living room with only the lamp on, the house creaking. I told myself silence was safety, but the next morning came a knock that made the dog bark and my stomach knot. 2 men in dark coats stood on the porch. The taller one flashed a badge. "Agent Kimball, FBI. We'd like to ask you a few questions." I blinked. "Is this about my sister?" "Not directly," he said. "But you may have insight into decisions made by the Argonne Foundation in its final fiscal year." The smaller agent added, "Your father left certain records we believe are relevant. We understand you may have access." The kitchen smelled faintly of coffee and burnt toast as I ushered them in. My voice was steady. "Sit down. Tell me what you're looking for." They asked about donations, about endowments. Their questions kept circling back to the period just before Dad's last hospitalization. I remembered the ledger entries on the USB, the wires to nonprofits that didn't quite exist. I hesitated, then said, "I may have something, but tell me." I caught myself. "Is she in trouble?" Agent Kimball didn't answer. He closed his notebook, thanked me politely, and left a card on the counter. When they were gone, I locked the door and leaned against it. The old house hummed with rain and cicadas. For the first time since Dad's funeral, I didn't feel only grief. Something sharper edged in, an investigative energy, like I'd stepped over a line I couldn't uncross. I reopened the safe that night. Under the weak bulb, I went through the files again, this time marking unusual transfers with sticky notes. I started scanning everything to a second drive. My hands shook not from sadness, but from focus. I whispered to the empty room, "If they think I'm afraid, they're wrong." Before dawn, I composed an anonymous email on a borrowed laptop, attaching a small selection of documents. I sent it to a federal tip line. Then, almost without thinking, I burned the original letter from Dad in the fireplace. The ashes curled like black petals. On the porch, drinking cold coffee as the sky turned pale, I muttered to no one, "I'm done being polite." My voice surprised me, quiet but hard. For the first time, the silence felt like it was cracking. The phone buzzed against the railing, unknown number. I almost ignored it until I saw the text. You're not the only one who saw what they did. Let's talk. See. I stared at it, thumb hovering. 100 names flashed in my mind before one settled. I whispered it under my breath. The pale light of dawn spilled across the kitchen floor in soft ribbons, illuminating the worn tiles and catching on the edge of the chipped counter. My phone buzzed again, the screen still aglow with the strange message I had received just after midnight. My thumb hovered over the reply field, hesitant, weighing the risk of engaging with a stranger or an ally. Finally, I typed, "Who are you?" The response came almost instantly. Camille. I used to work for Ronan. I saw things I shouldn't have. Celine doesn't back off. Be prepared. Camille. I knew the name. A quiet presence in the background of the boardroom meetings, always scribbling notes, always invisible. She was the kind of person everyone overlooked, efficient, polite, unassuming. I remembered her soft brown hair pulled tightly into a low bun, and how she never interrupted, never made noise. And now, out of the blue, she had reached out to me. My pulse quickened. Could this be the crack in Celine's perfect armor? I quickly responded, keeping the messages short, neutral. Camille said she had saved documents before she left the company, memos, emails, things she thought might one day matter. That day, apparently, had come. Not safe to meet yet, she wrote. But you should know. They're not just after your father's assets. They want silence. I put the phone down slowly, my fingers still tingling. Outside, cicadas had begun their buzzing chorus, their rhythmic hum seeping through the window screens. I stood at the sink, trying to shake off the unease. My coffee had gone cold again, untouched. Something about Camille's message rang too true to ignore. It confirmed what I'd felt but hadn't dared say aloud. This wasn't about land. It was about erasure. By late afternoon, the first blow landed. A crisp knock echoed through the house. When I opened the door, no one was there. Only a heavy envelope on the mat, thick with the weight of something serious. Cream-colored paper. Embossed gold seal. The kind of thing that practically screams legal trouble before you even break the seal. I ripped it open and skimmed the contents, my breath catching as I read the words, "You are hereby notified." Celine's legal team was alleging that I was illegally occupying the house. According to a loophole in the trust, a zoning discrepancy from decades ago invalidated my rights to the property. They were accusing me of fraudulent occupation. I whispered into the empty kitchen, "She doesn't just want me out, she wants to rewrite me out of existence." That night, I sat at the kitchen table with my father's old legal pad. I'd seen him scribble on these yellow sheets for years, checklists, estimates, half-drawn blueprints. Somehow, holding it now felt grounding. I made a list, administrative style, the way I used to do for executives who thought I was just a note-taker. Deeds, zoning laws, historical filings, city archives. Somewhere out there, I was sure, was the original hand-drawn map my father once proudly showed me as a child. I started calling attorneys. The first didn't answer. The second declined. The third quoted me a retainer that made my stomach twist. A figure so unreachable it felt like a joke. My savings had long since gone into patching the roof and paying back taxes. I was fighting a war with wooden spoons. The next morning, I drove to the city records office. The building was old, dusty, the kind of place that smelled like paper and damp brick. A clerk, an older woman with a cardigan faded by too many years of sun through her window, let me browse the archives. She barely looked up as I scrolled through grainy microfilm, hours slipping by. Just as my eyes began to blur, I found it, a scanned image of a property map, sketched in my father's familiar hand. It was signed, stamped, and filed 15 years before the version Celine's lawyers were referencing. I snapped photos from every angle and paid for a certified copy. Back home, a message from Malis awaited me in my inbox. "You're smarter than they think. Play the long game. No signature, no greeting, just those words." The court hearing was scheduled for the following Tuesday. That weekend, I prepared. I pulled out a navy blue dress my mother had given me long ago, back when she still spoke to me in terms of endearment and advice. For important days, she'd said. I ironed it carefully, ran my fingers along the seams. On the morning of the hearing, I tied my hair back and walked into the courthouse alone. Celine was already inside, seated at the front with her attorney. Her hair glimmered under the courtroom lights like spun gold. Her suit was so sharply tailored it looked like armor. She looked over at me with that same cold calculation, her expression unreadable but smug. Her lawyer, a young man with too much confidence and too little substance, stood and began spinning a story about occupancy irregularities and fiduciary neglect. He made it sound clinical, inevitable, like my removal was just a matter of procedure. When it was my turn, I stood slowly, heart pounding, but my voice stayed clear. I presented the certified copy of the original property map and my father's notes. The document was filed with the city 15 years prior to the current trust, I explained. The boundaries Celine's team is citing don't apply to this structure. The judge leaned forward, examining the pages. "Where did you obtain this?" he asked. "Public city records," I said. "It's all filed, accessible, and verifiable." He read the documents carefully. Then, after a pause that stretched like an entire season, he said, "This court grants a temporary stay on eviction and preserves the respondent's occupancy pending a full title review." Celine's jaw tightened. Her attorney looked rattled. For the first time, I saw a fracture in their confidence, a flicker of doubt. She gathered her papers quickly and stormed out without looking back. I stepped outside into the warm sunlight, blinking. The air felt electric. A small group of local reporters had gathered by the steps. One of them, a young guy with a press badge and a weathered camera, called out, "Hey, are you the forgotten sister?" I looked at him, then smiled, tight, certain. "Not anymore," I said, and walked right past them. On the drive home, I rolled down the windows and let the air whip my hair. It wasn't over, not by a long shot, but something had shifted. I had drawn my first line in the sand, and it held. That night, as dusk turned the porch blue and gold, I sat on the swing with my laptop open. Alerts flashed across the screen. Investigations into the Argonne Foundation, allegations surfacing. The news was catching up. Then a new email arrived. Subject: Enough. I opened it. "I've seen enough. I'm switching sides. You'll need backup. Signed, Malis." I stared at the screen for a long time. Then slowly, a smile tugged at the corner of my mouth. Not a smile of relief, but of readiness. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I wasn't standing alone. The flash drive in my jacket pocket felt heavier than metal, as though it carried the weight of everything I had refused to say until now. With each step up the weathered porch, the creaking boards beneath my feet echoed like a warning. The drizzle painted the air in silver threads, casting the old house in a somber haze. I stopped at the door, gripping the railing. Malis's words still rang in my ears. "I've seen enough. I'm switching sides." He had once stood firmly behind Celine. His defection meant something. It meant the ground was shifting. Inside, the kitchen was cold and dim, the kind of silence that made you hold your breath. I powered up the old laptop, its blue screen flickering like a ghost coming back to life. My fingers hesitated on the keyboard before I opened social media. And there it was, the Legacy Gala, splashed across every feed and headline. Picture after picture of Celine, glowing in front of Dad's oil portrait, surrounded by smiling donors and backslapping executives. She looked radiant, regal, unchallenged. The captions stung more than the images. "A night to honor the spirit of Mr. Argonne. Celine continues his mission with grace." No one embodies the Argonne legacy like Celine. I clenched my jaw, lips tight. No mention of me. No trace that I had even existed at his side. They'd written me out of the story, as though Celine had always been the rightful heir, the chosen one. I slammed the laptop shut. It wasn't just erasure. It was replacement. But something inside me didn't break. It hardened. Their applause was just noise now. Manufactured. Bought. And soon, questioned. I left the house that night with a single camellia in hand, one of the last blooms by the garden Mother had tended, by Father's gravestone. The clouds above pressed low, pregnant with rain, the cemetery quiet, but for the whisper of wind and far-off crickets. Kneeling before his headstone, I whispered, "It was never about the house, was it? It was about me, about silencing me, because I reminded them of you, the part they couldn't control." The marble was cold beneath my fingertips as I laid the flower down. I didn't cry, not anymore. What I felt wasn't grief. It was resolve, sharp and clear as glass. Back at the house, the door creaked on its hinges. I stepped in and froze. Footsteps. Then a familiar voice from the shadows. "You've come a long way from the girl they pushed aside." Malus emerged, his face paler, more lined than I remembered. His eyes looked haunted. "This is where your courage truly begins," he said quietly, sitting across from me at the kitchen table. He slid a manila folder toward me. I hesitated, then opened it. Inside were damning documents, internal financial ledgers riddled with inconsistencies, forged meeting minutes, wire transfers buried under layers of shell companies. All of it painted a clear picture. Celine hadn't just taken over the foundation. She had rewritten history to benefit herself, manipulating assets and laundering legacy. "She's tearing down what your father built," Malus said, voice raw. I was afraid. I let it happen. But this is too much. I flipped page after page, my heart thudding. Fraud, embezzlement, displaced board members, silenced whistleblowers. She'd built her empire not on our father's principles, but on deception. "If this goes public," I started. "It can't come from me," he interrupted. "They'll say I'm just a bitter old executive. You've kept quiet. You have clean hands. People will listen to you." I exhaled, trying to steady myself. Revenge was tempting. But this had to be about truth, not retribution. "Not rage," I murmured. A strategy. We planned late into the night. Malus had contacts, former board members Celine had ousted under pretense. Many were still bitter, but more importantly, they had their own receipts, their own files. If we could gather them quietly, build a coalition, leak the truth through independent reporters and watchdog groups, the foundation could be saved, even if Celine couldn't. "They made me quiet," I whispered. "But now, I'll speak in headlines." By morning, the ripple had begun. Whispers online, anonymous tips about questionable transfers within the Argonne Foundation. A niche finance blog speculated about inconsistencies in their charitable giving. Then, a national journalist tweeted, "Sources suggest not all is well in the Argonne Empire. Watch this space." Celine called a press conference that afternoon, fast, unscheduled. She stood at the podium with her usual elegance, flanked by PR reps and loyalists. But the reporters didn't smile this time. "Did your father approve of these organizational changes? Why were several board members removed without cause? Can you confirm where the missing funds from the Haiti program were redirected?" She dodged, danced, but her voice wavered. "Just once. Enough." That night, I returned home under a darkening sky, porch light flickering. Something caught my eye on the top step. A flash drive, tucked between the wooden slats, taped to it, a handwritten note. "He never trusted her. This proves it. From someone who kept quiet too long." My hands trembled as I picked it up. Whoever this was, they had more, and they had just joined our side. The silence had broken, and it was finally, gloriously loud. The flash drive in my hand still held the warmth of last night's revelations. As I stepped out into the gray hush of early morning, the sky was tinged with a pale blue that hadn't yet committed to dawn. The door clicked shut behind me, but I didn't look back. The weight in my pocket wasn't just plastic and metal. It was truth. It was the unraveling of lies wrapped in years of polished deception. Each step toward the mailbox was deliberate, as though I were walking a narrow bridge between the world I knew and the one I was about to expose. The neighborhood was still, blanketed in the silence of sleeping homes. Then a sound broke the quiet, the soft scrape of a chair on wood. Across the street, Mrs. Keene stood on her front porch. She wore a threadbare shawl and held a chipped floral mug with both hands. Her white hair was tucked into a bun, her eyes as sharp as ever. "Odessa!" she called, her voice like gravel softened by time. "I've been wanting to talk to you." I paused, surprised. "Good morning, Mrs. Keene." She stepped closer to the edge of her porch. "A week before your father passed, he came to see me, late, said he needed to talk to someone outside the house." I moved closer instinctively, heart thumping. He looked tired, not just sick, tired in his soul. He said, "Celine's got everyone fooled, but not me. I've made sure Odessa will be okay." Then he left. He didn't say more. I stared at her, emotions flooding my throat. "Did you see anyone else?" Her brow furrowed. "Actually, yes. That same night, a man I didn't recognize came by. Not dressed like a lawyer. Looked jumpy. Kept looking over his shoulder." A chill ran down my spine. "Do you remember his face?" "Barely. It was dark, but he had a scar across his cheek, and he drove off in a rusted blue sedan." I thanked her quietly and walked away, my mind reeling. Dad had known. He had tried to warn someone. And someone had come, possibly to hide or destroy the truth. I got in the car and drove south, past the corporate buildings and tidy cafes, down to the modest homes where loyalty still meant something. I pulled into Miguel's driveway. He was Dad's gardener for years. More than that, a quiet presence who loved the land as much as Dad had. The door opened slowly. Miguel stood in jeans and a flannel shirt, hands earthy, eyes wary. "Odessa," he said softly. "I need to ask you something. It's important. Did my father ever give you anything? Or say anything before he died?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he motioned for me to follow him out back, beyond the flower beds and into a small shed built from mismatched planks. From beneath a dusty floorboard, he retrieved a tin box and handed it to me. Inside was a yellowed envelope, sealed with wax that had half flaked off. He watched as I opened it. My fingers trembled as I unfolded the contents. It was a copy of Dad's estate plan, not the one filed after his death. This version was older, annotated in his handwriting. One line was underlined. "If anything happens to me, this is the truth." The ink was smudged, but the intent was clear. Tears sprang to my eyes. He knew they'd try to take everything. He left this for me. Miguel placed a hand on my shoulder. "He trusted you." Back home, I locked the doors and drew the curtains. The house felt too still, as if it too were waiting. I opened the laptop and inserted the flash drive. The files began to load: videos, audio clips, transcripts. I opened one folder marked Board MTG Audio. Celine's voice sliced through the room. "You think I don't see what this is? This isn't leadership. It's a coup." Then Dad's voice followed, calm, resolute. "You've rewritten bylaws, Celine. You're trying to erase your own father." Her scoff. "I'm ensuring stability." "No, you're ensuring power." I played it again and again. Every word was a hammer. My hands moved methodically, laying out the documents, the estate copy from Miguel, the audio files, timestamps, corporate emails I'd gathered quietly over the past year. Each piece connected. It told a story of a woman obsessed with control and a man betrayed in the final chapters of his life. I picked up the phone. One by one, I called Camille and Melis, the only two former board members Dad trusted until Celine forced them out, then two more, ex-CFO Donnelly and legal counsel Janet Yu. They were hesitant, voices guarded, until I shared what I had. "We need to move fast," I said, "before she buries this." We drafted a release. It wasn't a takedown, it was a surgical strike. Clean, legal, undeniable. Timelines, signatures, voice recordings, just the facts. "We leak it to the business press," Camille said. "Then it goes viral." "That's the point," I said. "No more secrets." By midday, whispers were spreading. Financial blogs posted anonymous leaks. A local anchor leaned into the camera and said, "Tonight, we're asking, were the Argon sisters hiding a deeper family fracture?" By evening, Celine called a press conference. She stood beneath cold lights, face perfect, posture practiced, but the questions were harder now. Did your father approve the changes to the board before he passed? She hesitated, just for a second. But it was enough. Of course, she said, avoiding eye contact. Her tone betrayed her. Later that night, just past midnight, I returned from a walk to find a small package on my doorstep. Another flash drive. I hurried to my study, locked the door, and inserted it into the computer. More files, hidden bank accounts, shell corporations. Celine hadn't just manipulated the company, she had bled it dry, funneling assets for months. On the wall above my desk was a bare hook, once home to Dad's photo. She'd removed it during her redecorating. I printed a copy and pinned it there again. Beneath it, I wrote a single word on a strip of paper and taped it below his image. Restored. I sat back, breath shaky but sure it had begun. The truth was no longer hidden, and neither was I. The sun broke through Savannah's sleepy skyline, casting golden ribbons across the creaky floorboards of my bedroom. I opened my eyes slowly, not from the comfort of rest, but from instinct. My hand reached for my phone even before I'd fully woken up. The screen lit up, blinding in the dim morning light. Dozens of notifications, dozens of headlines, the kind that once made my stomach drop, but not today. Argonne legacy shattered. Leaked voicemail reveals founder's final wishes. Celine's shame, forgery, fraud, family drama unfolds. Daughter disinherited or defended? My pulse quickened. I sat up, blinking at the onslaught of digital chaos. This wasn't a dream. This was real. It was happening. My truth, the one I buried for so long, was no longer mine alone. The world now held it, piece by piece, headline by headline. Outside, the morning air was thick with humidity, carrying the scent of rain-soaked wood and fresh tension. I wrapped myself in a shawl and stepped into the kitchen, the same kitchen I'd tiptoed through as a child. Today, the house felt different, alive, like it was finally breathing with me, not just around me. By 9:00 a.m., the press release had gone live, a precise, strategic drop. Not too emotional, not too cold, just enough fire to light the fuse. Within minutes, my inbox transformed into a war zone. Some emails brimmed with relief, others with shock, a few with thinly veiled threats. But I didn't reply. I didn't need to, because I was about to speak for myself. Celine had already taken the offensive, stepping in front of the cameras with a rehearsed smile and polished lies. She called me unstable, jealous, confused about the business legacy. Watching her felt like watching someone act in a play they never rehearsed, but the reporters were smarter than she realized. When one of them, a woman in a navy blazer, lifted her voice and asked, "What about the voicemail from your father?" Celine's facade cracked for half a second. That was all I needed. I walked onto the stage, not a stage with curtains, but the kind built from silence, betrayal, and long-held secrets. I sat down in front of the press, microphone trembling in my hand. I took a breath, then pressed play. Dad's voice, low and familiar, filled the air. A static hum preceded it, like it came from a different world. "Audie, I'm proud of you. I've left something for you at the house. Not the company, not the name, just something real. If Celine tries to twist things, remember, the truth doesn't need permission." Silence. No one moved. No one spoke. Even the reporters, usually buzzing with whispered commentary, just froze. Tears welled in my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. Not yet. Instead, I lifted my head, voice steady. "I remember who he really was," I said. Now, so does everyone else. The footage spread like wildfire. On social media, thousands commented in real time, "I'm crying. She finally told the truth." This broke me. By noon, it had over 1 million views. And then came the package. A courier knocked softly, almost reverently, like he knew the contents mattered. The box he handed me was small, unassuming, with my full name and a line in Dad's handwriting, "Hold 6 months unless claimed." Inside was a wooden box, carved with my childhood nickname, Audie Bug. I opened it slowly. The scent of old cedar wafted out, memories in the form of wood. Inside, a small brass key, a worn photograph of me on Dad's shoulders, sun in our eyes, laughter frozen in time. A letter. His handwriting sloped gently, familiar and unshakably his. You always saw the world differently. That's why I gave you the house. Not because it was less, because it was everything. My knees buckled. I slid to the floor, clutching the box to my chest, tears flowing without shame. For once, I didn't cry from pain, but from being seen, from knowing that somewhere deep down, he had always understood me. The tides shifted fast. That afternoon, Celine was subpoenaed for financial misrepresentation and forgery. Former board members, some of whom once brushed me off at family galas, now pushed for audits and public accountability. Silent investors began to pull out, not with noise, but with cold calculation. Celine's glossy image fractured. She vanished from charity events and PR dinners. Eventually, someone leaked a video of her, hunched in a trench coat, sunglasses low, muttering, "No comment," to a flurry of flashing cameras. At a public QA, a reporter asked, "Will you press charges?" I paused, looked them in the eye. "I trust the system," I said quietly. "I trust the truth." That night, with the media frenzy swirling but distant, I drove out to Dad's grave. No entourage. No cameras. Just me. I knelt by his headstone, the breeze stirring my hair. I laid a bundle of wildflowers at the base, lavender and Queen Anne's lace, his favorites. There were no speeches, just a whisper. Thank you. Back home, the house welcomed me like an old friend. I stepped onto the porch, barefoot, journal in my lap. The air was thick with the scent of pine and dusk. I could hear cicadas beginning their evening chorus. I opened my journal. Tomorrow, I tell the world what's next. On my terms. I looked out at the trees, the twilight, the quiet strength of the home I now truly owned. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like the forgotten daughter. I felt like the one who remembered everything. Sunlight filtered through the lace curtains of my bedroom, stretching long golden fingers across the wooden floor. I lay still for a moment, my breathing steady, my heart no longer racing as it once did at dawn. There were no nightmares last night, no visions of boardrooms, betrayal, or the suffocating grip of legacy, just dreams of color and silence and a field of wildflowers. I rose, pulled on a simple blouse and a soft linen skirt. No sharp angles, no statement pieces, no designer shoes meant to impress anyone but myself. For the first time in what felt like years, I felt like me. Uncomplicated, honest, free. Downstairs, the coffee pot bubbled quietly, the scent rising to greet me like an old friend. I carried my cup to the front porch, settling into the weathered rocking chair my father once favored. The porch creaked beneath my bare feet. The neighborhood hadn't changed much since I was a child. The same crooked mailboxes, the same morning dog walkers, the same sense of stillness before the world begins again. But I had changed, and somehow that made everything look new. By mid-morning, I had made the calls, sent the emails. No press junket, no flashy announcement. Just a notice at the town hall bulletin board, an open invitation posted online, a community address by my name. All welcome. The event wasn't meant for headlines, it was meant for hearts. The town hall filled slowly, in that gentle, hesitant way small towns do. Artists carrying sketchbooks under their arms, retired teachers with kind eyes and worn shoes, local shop owners and teens with backpacks slung lazily over one shoulder. A few faces stood out, people who had once doubted me, who had called me naive or ungrateful. They were here too, curiosity outweighing pride. That was enough. The podium stood exactly where it had during my childhood performances, my first piano recital, my 8th grade poetry reading. I ran my hand along the familiar grain of the wood and unfolded a small piece of paper from my pocket. Not a speech, just a reminder. This isn't about revenge, it's about reclaiming stories. The microphone gave a brief crackle as I began. "Thank you all for coming," I said, my voice steady. When I was younger, I thought legacy meant power, that it lived in boardrooms, in inheritance, in numbers. But what my father left me wasn't stock or company shares. It was deeper than that. He left me his stories, his brushes, his music, his belief that art could hold pain, memory, and hope all at once. The room was silent, listening, really listening. I'm here today not to start a new company, but a new chapter for all of us. I'm proud to announce the founding of the Hearthlight Library and Arts Archive, a community-funded space where we can create, preserve, and tell our stories. It will be home to local art, oral histories, workshops, and open studios. This isn't for profit, it's for people. A few gasps, then a ripple of applause. Then it grew, row by row, person by person, a standing ovation, not polite, not performative, real. I spotted Mrs. Keene, my middle school art teacher, wiping her eyes. Camille stood in the back, her ever-present folder clutched to her chest, smiling with relief. Malis, my friend and steadfast ally, sat near the aisle, her face glowing with pride. It felt like exhaling after years of holding my breath. It felt like home. Later, during the local news coverage, a reporter asked gently, "Do you have anything you'd like to say to your sister?" I paused. For a moment, I thought about all the things I could say. All the anger, all the betrayal, all the pain. But instead, I simply smiled. A warm, quiet, unburdened smile. That image, me smiling under soft lights, no words, just peace, went viral within hours. Social media called it the smile that ended everything. It was painted, reposted, memed, turned into pop art and protest art alike. Celine's world, unlike mine, didn't erupt. It eroded, slowly, quietly. Lawsuits drained her wealth. Investors turned cold. She relocated to a smaller city, her name no longer a golden ticket. A leaked video showed her wandering through an empty penthouse, muttering, "She set me up." But the world had moved on, and no one was listening anymore. Meanwhile, I found something sweeter than victory. Purpose. I started teaching free weekend art classes at the community center. Children with messy hands and big imaginations came with wide eyes and wide hearts. We painted dreams. We sculpted fears. We learned that art didn't have to be perfect to be powerful. My home, once a hollow place full of echoing memories, now hummed with life. Sunlight danced through the windows, ferns curled in corners. My father's records played soft jazz as I cooked dinner barefoot. Every evening, I wrote in the journal I'd once thought he'd read, letters to the father I had lost, and in some way, found again. One entry read, "I forgave her, but I didn't forget, and I didn't let her win." Around Dad's grave, wildflowers bloomed in rebellious clusters, unplanned, unkempt, beautiful. Neighbors had taken to watering them, planting seeds, leaving tiny painted stones. It became a ritual, a sacred rebellion against silence and erasure. One afternoon, I passed a mural in the downtown district. It showed Dad and me side by side, his arm around my shoulder, both of us smiling. It was bold and colorful, painted by a group of local teenagers who said the city needed more truth on the walls. A little girl ran up to me with a paint-smeared sketchbook. "Are you the lady who made the library?" "I guess I am," I laughed, kneeling to her level. "Will you sign my sketchbook?" I did, with a flourish. At sunset that evening, I returned to the library I had built. The sun turned the windows to gold. I unlocked the front doors and stepped inside. On the wall near the entrance, a plaque read, "For every voice that was silenced, here, you speak first." I stood still in the quiet, surrounded by books, canvases, colors, and stories waiting to be told. A gentle peace settled over me, fierce, soft, and completely mine. Sometimes, the ones who try to silence you only teach you how to speak louder, with purpose, not volume. This story wasn't just about inheritance. It was about identity, dignity, and reclaiming your voice in a family that wanted it erased. What would you have done if you were in her place? Have you ever felt like the forgotten one in your own family story? If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more powerful, true-to-life family stories that reveal the quiet strength behind the scenes. Your story might be next.